So this talk is called Abortion in the Tri-Cities, and I invited Planned Parenthood to come join me tonight, and it was supposed to be them giving you 10 minutes of their objective and their plans and their argument, and then I was going to just give you 10 minutes of, pro-life stuff, and then we were going to take questions for an hour and 10 minutes. Well, luckily, since I screwed up the time, we wouldn't have had much time for questions. But since they aren't here, I've actually developed kind of a talk that'll unfortunately take up most of the time, but I think it will answer a lot of questions. And better yet, it'll give you resources to go to get a lot better answers than I'd give you. So if you guys want to go ahead and again, those resources are on the pamphlet. And I refer to some things in here, but my pamphlet has the best resources in it, so I would recommend those. So abortion in the Tri-Cities. So why are we here? Back in November of last year, Planned Parenthood decided to put on 2 events right up in Grand Island, Nebraska. And when I did a little research on that, these were not the first events that they were putting on in Grand Island. They've done this periodically over the years, and it seems to be increasing more and more each year. So the first event was called an open house, but it actually wasn't open. It had 14 people attend, and it was on November 21st, Thursday, November 21st. But those of us who registered and tried to go, or those of us that just decided we were going to go see an open house, were turned away at the door. So it wasn't open. That's the moral to that story. That was not an open house. It was a misnomer. So the other event, the next day, was something called a policy summit. And the policy summit actually had 21 people attend. But again, when those of us came to show up and walk in and see what the policies were, again, we were turned away at the door. So very few people that weren't ardent advocates of abortion actually know what's going on there. Some of us have bits and pieces. Some people heard some discussions while people were walking in and out while they were being told they can't come in. And so we know some things. And some of that is kind of helped me develop the talk tonight. But the question is, what were the policies that they were promoting for that really about 2/3 of a day seminar or policy summit that they had? Well, the policies are really making more money through abortion. That's the fundamental policy of Planned Parenthood across the nation. The problem is they've had hundreds of clinics close across the nation over the past 10 years. So they have way fewer clinics today than they used to have. So they have much, their income has to come from a much broader territory to travel to them. So with fewer Planned Parenthood clinics, they need aggressive marketing. They need a positive public image, whether it's honest or not. They need to encourage patients to travel, and they need lots of collaboration with local hospitals, doctors, health providers, and such. And when I invited Planned Parenthood to come talk with us tonight, they declined and said, "We hope to have some collaboration with organizations in your area soon, and we just don't think this is the right time for us to engage in something like this." I couldn't agree more. They shouldn't come here tonight because it wouldn't go very well for them, not because I'm so smart, but because the facts are so stacked against them. So all I have to do is provide information, and it makes Planned Parenthood look pretty bad whether they're here or not. So the information I'm going to give you tonight is just information. It's not really my opinion in many cases, although I'm sure I have some opinion in there somewhere that I don't recognize. But what I want to point out is that Planned Parenthood really plans to be talking with local doctors offices, nurses, clinics, anybody they can talk to, because they probably aren't going to put an abortion clinic in Grand Island, Kearney, or Hastings. They might. But what they're probably going to do is try to get more people from our area to go east and go to Omaha and Lincoln to their clinics. So that is really their goal. So that was, I believe, the fundamental part of their policy. So in order for us to understand why Planned Parenthood is doing what they're doing and why they're trying to do it right here in central Nebraska, it is fundamental that we first understand what an abortion is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a series of very short videos, about 3 minutes each. These do not show any abortions. They show what an abortion does, how it happens, and it's from an abortion doctor who is no longer performing abortions. He's pro-life now. But even so, if it triggers something in you, just look at the floor. You can listen, but I don't think it's going to be troubling really for anybody. So what we're going to start with is what happens with an abortion in the first trimester when it's called a medical abortion. So in the first trimester, there's two kinds of abortion. There's a medical abortion, which is done with pills, and there is a surgical abortion, which is done with instruments. So this is the first trimester medical abortion. There we go. A little patience.
My name is Dr. Anthony Levatino. I'm a practicing obstetrician gynecologist, and I've performed over 1,200 abortions. Today I'm going to describe a first trimester medical abortion. This is a procedure in which the mother swallows pills in order to terminate her baby, and it is performed up to the 10th week of pregnancy. The procedure involves 2 steps. Step 1. At the abortion clinic or doctor's office, the woman takes pills which contain mifepristone, also called RU46. RU46 blocks the action of a hormone called progesterone. Progesterone is naturally produced in the mother's body to stabilize the lining of the uterus. When RU46 blocks progesterone, the lining of the mother's uterus breaks down, cutting off blood and nourishment to the baby, who then dies inside the mother's womb. It is important to note that even after it has been taken, it is possible to reverse the effects of RU46 and save the baby if progesterone is administered. The sooner, the better. Step 2. 24 to 48 hours after taking RU46, the woman takes misoprostol, also called Cytotec, that is administered either orally or vaginally. RU46 and misoprostol together cause severe cramping, contractions, and often heavy bleeding to force the dead baby out of the woman's uterus. The process can be very intense and painful, and the bleeding and contractions can last from a few hours to several days. While she could lose her baby anytime and anywhere during this process, the woman will often sit on a toilet as she prepares to expel the child, which she will then flush. She may even see her dead baby within the pregnancy sac. At 9 weeks, for example, the baby will be almost an inch long, and if she looks carefully, she might be able to count the fingers and toes. After she has disposed of her baby, the woman may have bleeding and spotting for several weeks. Bleeding lasts, on average, 9 to 16 days. 8% of women bleed more than 30 days, and 1% require hospitalization because of heavy bleeding. The failure rate increases as the pregnancy progresses. If failure occurs, she will usually be offered a surgical abortion. For the mother, medical abortion often causes abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headache, and heavy bleeding. Maternal deaths have occurred, most frequently due to infection and undiagnosed ectopic pregnancy. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anthony Levatino.
Okay, so Dr. Levatino described the first trimester medical abortion for us. Now, many mothers who start that process regret it after taking the first pill. So, in order to still save the baby, Nebraska now has the abortion reversal pill. So after taking the first pill, the mother can call a hotline or call a local physician that is pro-life and get a prescription for the abortion reversal pill. It was legalized in Nebraska in 2019. Right here in Hastings, we have Wellspring, and up in Grand Island and Kearney, we have Collage. So I know that Wellspring has it, availability for the abortion pill, how to get it, and I got to think Collage does too. So I just pulled this off of Wellspring's site. Their information is also in the pamphlet. So the first trimester abortion, again using the pills, is performed up to the 10th week. The baby's heartbeat begins at 22 days on the average. You can actually detect the heartbeat by 5.5 weeks. By the 10th week of development, the baby is already has all the DNA for 10 weeks to know its sex, its eye color, its hair color, whether it's right-handed or left-handed. All these things are already in it because the DNA happens at the moment of fertilization, which is 10 weeks before an abortion at 10 weeks. Okay, all that stuff is already determined. So now we're going to look at a surgical abortion in the first trimester. And we'll see if this one goes better than the first one. There we go. Let's try it again. Oh, that's not right. Oh, it's not working right. Let's go back here. This really did work absolutely perfect earlier today. Hey.
My name is Dr. Anthony Levatino. I'm a practicing obstetrician gynecologist, and I've performed over 1,200 abortions. Today I'm going to describe a first trimester surgical abortion called suction D&C, dilatation and curettage. This is the most frequently performed abortion and is used typically from 5 to 13 weeks of pregnancy. After administering anesthesia, the abortionist uses a speculum like this. This is placed inside the vagina and opened using this screw on the side, allowing the abortionist to see the cervix, the entrance to the uterus. The cervix acts as a gate that stays closed for the duration of pregnancy, protecting the baby until it is ready for birth. The abortionist uses a series of metal rods called dilators, like these, which increase in thickness, and inserts them into the cervix to dilate it, gaining access to the inside of the uterus where the baby resides. The baby has a heartbeat, fingers, toes, arms, and legs, but its bones are still weak and fragile. The abortionist takes a suction catheter, like this one. This is a 14 French suction catheter. It's clear plastic, about 9 inches long, and it has a hole through the center. It is inserted through the cervix into the uterus. The suction machine is then turned on with a force 10 to 20 times more powerful than your household vacuum cleaner. The baby is rapidly torn apart by the force of the suction and squeezed through this tubing down into the suction machine, followed by the placenta. Though the uterus is mostly emptied at this point, one of the risks of a suction D&C is incomplete abortion, essentially pieces of the baby or placenta left behind. This can lead to infection or bleeding. In an attempt to prevent this, the abortionist uses a curette to scrape a lining of the uterus. The curette is basically a long-handled curved blade. Once the uterus is empty, the speculum is removed and the abortion is complete. The risks of suction D&C include perforation or laceration of the uterus or cervix, potentially damaging intestine, bladder, and nearby blood vessels, hemorrhage, infection, and in rare instances, even death. Future pregnancies are also at a greater risk for loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related trauma and injury to the cervix. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anthony Levatino.
You're going to get kind of used to him introducing himself as a guy that did 1,200 abortions or more and stuff, because it starts every video that way, but it's short. So, all right, so that tells you a little bit about the surgical abortion that happens in the first trimester. Between 5 and 13 weeks. It's the most common type of abortion. Well, at least the abortion in the first 5 to 13 weeks is the most common type of abortion, either one of these. But he talks about how powerful that suction is, maybe up to 20 times more than your household vacuum cleaner. He describes the baby as being rapidly torn apart and squeezed through the tubing. So LB 814 is a new bill in the Nebraska legislature which would ban that type of abortion in Nebraska. So Senator Suzanne Geist introduced that at the beginning of the legislative term just a couple of weeks ago. And so this is a room full of people that should thank Suzanne Geist for doing that and should call your own senator and tell them to support it. And I'm sure Senator Halloran has, probably Senator Merman and others. But they need to hear from you because it's very important for them to know that what their constituents want them to do. So thank you, Suzanne Geist, Senator Geist, for doing that, because there's going to be a lot of pushback in the legislature on that, but hopefully we've got enough pro-life senators now to get it through. So we're going to look at the second trimester abortions now, and Dr. Levatino is going to give us the lowdown on that.
My name is Dr. Anthony Levatino. I'm a practicing obstetrician gynecologist, and I've performed over 1,200 abortions. Today I'm going to describe the second trimester
Sound is off.
abortion called
Let me pause that for a
dilatation and
second.
evacuation, or D&E. A D&E is
Try that again there.
or between 13 and 24 weeks of pregnancy. After administering anesthesia, the abortionist uses a weighted speculum, like this one, that opens the vagina widely. Because second trimester babies are so large, this greater access facilitates a late-term abortion. Late-term abortion requires that the cervix be prepared 24 to 48 hours in advance with laminaria. Laminaria is a type of sterilized seaweed that absorbs water over 8 to 12 hours and swells to several times its original diameter. Once removed, metal dilators can be used to further open the cervix as needed. Once the cervix has been stretched open, the suction tube is placed inside. A baby at 20 weeks gestation is as big as the length of my hand, from head to rump, not counting the legs. The suction machine is turned on, and pale yellow amniotic fluid surrounding the baby is suctioned out through the catheters. With babies this big, they don't fit through catheters this size. The baby's bones and skull are too strong to be torn apart by suction alone. This is a Sofer clamp. A Sofer clamp is made of stainless steel. It's about 13 inches long. The business end is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide, and there are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. The abortionist uses this clamp to grasp an arm or a leg. Once he has a firm grip, the abortionist pulls hard in order to tear the limb from the baby's body. One by one, the rest of the limbs are removed, along with the intestines, the spine, and the heart and lungs. Usually the most difficult part of the procedure is extracting the baby's head, which is about the size of a large plum at 20 weeks. The head is grasped and crushed. The abortionist knows he has crushed the skull when a white substance comes out of the cervix. This was the baby's brains. The abortionist then removes skull pieces. He removes the placenta and any leftover parts of the baby with a curette, scraping the lining of the uterus for any remaining tissue. The abortionist then collects the baby parts and reassembles them to make sure that there are 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces. Once all the parts have been accounted for, the abortion is complete. For the woman, this procedure carries a significant risk of major complications, including perforation or laceration of the uterus or cervix, with possible damage to the bowel, bladder, and other maternal organs. Infection and hemorrhage can also occur, which can even lead to death. Future pregnancies are also at greater risk for loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related trauma and injury to the cervix. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anthony Levatino.
Okay, so Dr. Levatino again. I think I might have misspoke. Did I say that LB 814 would ban the first trimester abortion? It'd actually be the second trimester abortion. And so that's I believe, the one that would be banned because the baby's still alive and is basically torn apart alive. So that's the one that would be banned by LB 814. So as you can see, it's good to have a doctor describing this stuff instead of a lawyer. So that's why I hired Dr. Levatino by pulling him up on the internet. You can find all his videos on liveaction.org. It's a great pro-life website. And there's actually a much longer video, and these are segments within that video, but very descriptive about Dr. Levatino's description and information on it. So that's the second trimester. Surgical abortion. There's no more medical abortions after the first trimester. Can't be performed by suction alone. It's between 13 and 24 weeks. They use the Sofer clamp, so that large metal tool that they tear the baby apart with. He describes pulling the limbs off the baby and then crushing the skull so the head can be removed. And so that's basically Dr. Levatino's description for the second trimester. So now this is going to tell us about the third trimester induced abortion.
My name is Dr. Anthony Levatino. I'm a practicing obstetrician gynecologist, and I've performed over 1,200 abortions. Today I'm going to describe a third trimester induced abortion, which is performed at 25 weeks to term. At this point, the baby is almost fully developed and viable, meaning he or she could survive outside the womb if the mother were to go into labor prematurely. Because the baby is so large and developed, this procedure takes 3 or 4 days to complete. On day 1, the abortionist uses a large needle to to inject a drug called digoxin. Digoxin is generally used to treat heart problems, but a high enough dosage of digoxin will cause fatal cardiac arrest. The abortionist inserts the needle with the digoxin through the woman's abdomen or through her vagina and into the baby, targeting either the head, torso, or heart. The baby will feel it. Babies at this stage feel pain. When the needle pierces the baby's body and the digoxin takes effect, the life of the baby will end. The abortionist then inserts multiple sticks of seaweed called laminaria into the woman's cervix. They will slowly open up the cervix for delivery of a stillborn baby. While the woman waits for the laminaria to dilate her cervix, she carries her dead baby inside of her for 2 to 3 days. On day 2, the abortionist replaces the laminaria and may perform a second ultrasound to ensure the baby is dead. If the child is still alive, he administers another lethal dose of digoxin. The woman then goes back to where she is staying while her cervix continues to dilate. If she goes into labor and is unable to make it to the clinic in time, she will give birth at home or in a hotel. In this case, she may be advised to deliver her baby into a bathroom toilet. The abortionist then comes to remove the baby and clean up. If she can make it to the clinic, she will do so during her severest contractions and deliver her dead son or daughter. If the baby does not come out whole, then the procedure becomes a D&E, a dilation and evacuation, and the abortionist uses clamps and forceps to dismember the baby, piece by piece. Once the placenta and all the body parts have been removed, the abortion is complete. Late-term abortions have a high risk of hemorrhage, lacerations, and uterine perforations, as well as a risk of maternal death. Future pregnancies are also at a greater risk for loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related trauma and injury to the cervix. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anthony Levatino, and in the early part of my career as an OBGYN, I performed over 1,200 abortions. One day, after completing one of those abortions, I looked at the remains of a preborn child whose life I had ended, and all I could see was someone's son or daughter. I came to realize that killing a baby at any stage of pregnancy for any reason is wrong. I want you to know today, no matter where you're at or what you've done, you can change. Make a decision today to protect the preborn. Thank you for your time. I will no longer do any more abortions. When you finally figure out that killing a baby that big for money is wrong, and it doesn't take you too long to figure out it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or this big or this big or maybe even this big, it's all the same. And I haven't done any since then and I never will.
So, before any saint was a saint, they were a sinner, right? And that's a nice conversion story. So, again, this is a third trimester abortion performed any time after 25 weeks right up to the moment of delivery. At this point, any time along this line, the child can survive outside the womb. If a child is premature at 25 weeks, there's a very high rate of success at a very healthy life for the child. Perfectly normal, actually. It is the rarest form of abortion procedure done, of course, because it's so late and so risky. But it's one that is highly promoted by abortion advocates today. So they're talking about even infanticide in some cases at the deepest levels of the culture of death. So if there were 825,000 abortions in the U.S. last year, and there probably were, that means that 12,375 were third trimester abortions. That's half the population of this city that we're in. And again, it's a 3 to 4 day procedure. So day 1, they inject digoxin right into the baby's body, aiming for the head, the heart, or the chest. The mother continues to carry that dead child for 2 to 3 days, as Dr. Levatino says. Sometimes on the second day, probably not the third, the baby might be injected a second time with digoxin if it survived the first injection. And then the mother either gives birth to the deceased child or the child is removed by D&E. So you've probably heard the statistic that abortion is only 3% of Planned Parenthood's business, right? Well, that's wrong. And so late statistics, and actually it's probably more than 1 out of 8 Planned Parenthood patients receive an abortion when they go to the clinic. So really, just by those numbers alone, it's a minimum of 12.5%, so not 3%. They do this because of the way that they characterize the stuff they do. So a $500 or a $1,200 abortion is the same as a $10 pregnancy test or a breast exam or anything else. They're all just services. So they don't go by the cost of the service or the extensive nature of the service. They simply call anything a service. So the more services they do, which are not abortions, allows them to play with the numbers. So I think there's a video on this too. Yeah, all right, so a short video.
America's largest abortion chain, Planned Parenthood, claims over and over and over again that abortion is only 3% of the services that they offer.
That's your self-reported abortion statistic.
3% of all the procedures we provide.
It's in their annual report. It's on their website. And their supporters say it all the time.
And abortions only comprise 3% of Planned Parenthood's health services.
Abortion services only account for about 3%.
Because only 3% of what Planned Parenthood does is abortions.
3% of patients visit Planned Parenthood for a safe and legal abortion.
Here's why that statistic is completely bogus, and why the senior editor of the online magazine Slate said that the 3% stat was the, quote, most meaningless abortion statistic ever, and why the Washington Post fact checker gave Planned Parenthood's 3% statistic 3 Pinocchios, marking it as, quote, very misleading. Let's look at the numbers. According to their own annual report, Planned Parenthood commits over 300,000 abortions per year. Last year alone, they did 323,999 abortions.
That's an old statistic.
887 abortions per day, 37 abortions per hour, 1 abortion every 97 seconds. Again, Planned Parenthood commits 1 abortion every 97 seconds. But how much of what Planned Parenthood does is abortion? Well, let's divide the number of abortions they do in a year by the number of patients they see in a year. 323,999 abortions for 2.5 million patients means that 1 in 8 patients who walk into Planned Parenthood will undergo an abortion. Not 1 in 33, Elizabeth Warren, 1 in 8. It's easy to see where Planned Parenthood's priorities are. They commit 160 abortions for every 1 adoption referral. Though Planned Parenthood constantly talks about their breast exams and Pap tests, they only do less than 1% of the nation's Pap tests and 1.8% of the nation's breast exams, while they do 30.6%, a third of the nation's abortions. But that's a public relations problem. So Planned Parenthood came up with a creative way to make their big business, abortion, look very small. To get the 3% figure, Planned Parenthood divides abortions by the number of so-called services, which they define as a discrete clinical interaction. And they count all these services equally, regardless of the cost, time, or effort it takes to render that service. So an entire abortion procedure, which can cost from $390 to $1,500, is counted the same as a pregnancy test, which a girl could get at a pharmacy for $10. In this way, Planned Parenthood is able to count 9.4 million services. Divide 323,999 abortions by 9.4 million services, and they get 3%. It's easy to see why this math is completely ridiculous. Say a woman goes to Planned Parenthood to get an abortion. She gets her pregnancy test, the abortion procedure, an STI test, and some contraceptives. In one visit, she gets 4 services, one of which is the actual abortion. So Planned Parenthood would say that abortion was only 25% of what they did for that woman, who came into the clinic only for an abortion. Well, by this math, even if 100% of Planned Parenthood patients got an abortion, they would still say abortion is only 25% of their services. Such distorted calculations could be used to obscure the purpose of any business. It would be like the NFL saying that because they sold 5 million hot dogs in a season and there were only 256 games, football is only 0.005% of what they do. Or it'd be like a steakhouse saying, actually, steak is only a very small percentage of what we serve, because we also serve salad, mashed potatoes, french fries, beer, wine, soda, water, butter, salt, pepper, ketchup, toothpicks, and breath mints. We'd say, yeah right, you're a steakhouse. Just like Planned Parenthood is an abortion corporation.
So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps explain a little bit about the. Can you still hear me? By the way, okay, all right. I I think I had to turn that down. That's probably why. So hopefully that explains a little bit about the 3% myth. So don't fall for that one. That's a very popular one, and the media ate it alive. So it just keeps on getting regurgitated out for everybody. So not the only, but really the service that Planned Parenthood offers, which is not already readily available in the Tri-Cities, is abortion. There's no abortions being performed that we know of, at least I know of, in the Tri-City area. And so when you think Planned Parenthood, you got to think abortion. It's way more than 3%. It's even more than 1 in 8 now, because as we learned in the most recent 2018 figures, that video was shot in either late 2015 or 2016 using 2014 numbers or 2013 numbers. But what we know now is Planned Parenthood is getting a much larger share of the national abortions, and they are doing way less services like Pap smears and breast exams and cancer screenings and STI screenings, things like that. So their ratio is way more than 12.5. It's probably much closer to 25 to 30%, even though they're still calling all these other things services. They're doing way fewer of them. So this 2018 report shows that 2 years ago now, they performed 345,672 abortions, which is an increase of 13,000 over 2017. An interesting statistic is that's the most they've ever performed in a year. So even though the national abortion rate is dropping, Planned Parenthood's taking a bigger and bigger bite of the pie. They're making more money than any other abortion provider out of there, so they are the giant of the abortion industry. They received $616,800,000 in taxpayer money. So $616.8 million of our taxpayer money, even though we have laws that say our money can't fund abortions, went to Planned Parenthood in 2018. That comes from the government grants, Medicaid reimbursements, and other sources, but it's taxpayer money. All right. So just this year, Planned Parenthood said, we don't want any Title X money anymore. So instead of, really trying to keep our finances so that we can at least show on paper that these funds are not going toward abortions, we'd rather just forget it. And they gave up millions of dollars of taxpayer money just so they wouldn't have to cook the books anymore, basically, so they wouldn't have to fake it. So that tells you how lucrative the business is, all right? So they're now starting to do it maybe without as much taxpayer money, but they're still going to receive taxpayer money. They did in 2018 to this tune. They received it in 2019, probably a larger amount, and then in 2020 they're still going to receive some. It's just we don't know how much yet. So internationally, there are 125,000 abortions every day, and that's kind of an old figure. It might be up, might be down, but the most recent figure that we know of is every day worldwide there's 125,000 abortions. So what's that got to do with Planned Parenthood? Because the International Planned Parenthood Federation is the prime marketer of abortions worldwide. So whenever, under the previous presidential administration, third world or fourth world country wanted funding from the U.S. and help from the U.S., they always had to accept education on family planning, and that education was given by Planned Parenthood through the International Planned Parenthood Federation. So basically the United States has turned the whole world into a huge abortion market, and so there's 125,000 abortions every day worldwide, and we already heard the numbers about how many abortions are in the U.S. So what's the smallest part of Planned Parenthood's business? What about that 3% abortion? Well, other than labor and delivery, which I don't think they do any, they do refer 0.044% of their patients to adoption. So very few, and that's actually down in the 2018 report. So there's really only one solution for pregnancy, solving that disease called pregnancy. 95% of the time is abortion. So that's their solution. But there is some good news. So just last week, there were hundreds of thousands of pro-lifers marching in Washington, D.C. All right? So that happens every year. It's happened for 47 years. Has anybody in here ever been on the March for Life in Washington, D.C.? Yeah. There we go. We've got a first-timer right here, my daughter Grace, who went this year. So, So yeah, so that's an amazing experience. I mean, I've never been in a mob of that many people. We know the Nebraska Cornhusker experience, going to Memorial Stadium on maybe opening days, a Saturday morning. Multiply that by, 5, 6 times. It's an enormous crowd of people. So this was the first time that the President of the United States ever appeared at the March for Life. So in the past, they've done phone calls. In the past, even this President Trump did a video live feed, to the group to give them a little talk. Vice President Pence has been talking at it for a few years. He wasn't there this year, but President Trump was. So that's a big deal, because every year all of this happens in Washington, D.C. without the media even knowing that it happened. So having something like that was a good thing. But there's even more good news, because in the 2018 report, we saw that private donors gave $40 million less to Planned Parenthood in 2018 than they did in 2017. So that is an enormous amount of money. I wonder what caused that. I think it's education. I think it's simply people learning what Planned Parenthood really does, because of people like Live Action, maybe most especially because of somebody like David Daleiden, who went in with the hidden cameras and was able to actually film these people, talk about the abortion procedures and what they actually do. That type of education cooled $40 million worth of income for Planned Parenthood in 2018 alone. Additionally, they lost 400,000 supporters in that year. So in 2017 to 2019, they lost 400,000 people that considered themselves Planned Parenthood supporters. So that's kind of like stubbing your toe on on the bed, isn't it? I just like that picture. That's kind of a funny picture. So it seems like I left something out, but I will open it up for questions. So if anybody has any questions, then if I think of what else I meant to say and forgot to say, I will. Yeah, go ahead.
Tell me the symptoms a woman might have after she aborts.
Well, for instance, like Dr. Levatino says, there's different, physical side effects of it, but there's also studies that talk about a very risky lifestyle afterward. There are studies that show much higher rates of depression, attempted suicide, successful suicide. Some women continually have abortions, so they've talked about women that have had 5, 6, 7, 8 abortions, and that might be because of slave trafficking, sex slave trafficking. That might be because of prostitution, but there's just a higher use of drugs and alcohol. It's just there's just, and some people say, well, they're probably doing that because they were doing that before they went in and had the abortion. And maybe that's why they got pregnant in the first place and why they chose the abortions, because they were living a very risky lifestyle. That's possible. But we do know by statistics that the lifespan of a woman post-abortion is shorter than the normal healthy woman who does not have an abortion in the United States. And other countries have similar statistics like that. So that's one of them. Yeah.
I had done, in 2002 or 2003, I was doing some research for a class I was taking at the Tech, and what I found was they said at that time if you had one abortion between or before the age of 19 and before any live births, you had an 800% chance of getting breast cancer.
Yeah, and there's a China study on breast cancer and abortion too. So, and it might use that as part of the statistics, but there's a close relation in China. Now, China has had for a long time a policy called the one-child policy, and that meant that if you were a Chinese citizen, you were limited to having one child. Now, the Chinese culture prizes male children over female children. It's a cultural thing. And so what was happening a lot is that a lot of people were getting pregnant. China is one of the most populous places on the face of the earth. So they would go in and they would determine the child's sex, and if it was a female, they would have an abortion. And then they'd get pregnant again. If it was a female, they'd have an abortion. If it was a female, they'd have an abortion. Finally, they might give up and go ahead and have the female child and suffer the cultural shame that came with that in China. But the problem was then after a few years and after probably billions and billions of abortions, China realized we've got a lot more men in our country than women. And just a small percentage can really screw up the demographics of a country, especially a country that size. So now they've installed the rule that says 2 children, as if that's going to make a big difference with sex-select abortion. But even in our country, in the U.S., when our lawmakers, pro-life lawmakers, have been trying to get laws passed that say it's illegal to have a sex-select abortion in the U.S., they get enormous pushback by Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers through their lobbyists. And I think that this year, Planned Parenthood is going to spend $45 million trying to elect pro-abortion candidates in November. So that money that comes from the taxpayers goes to the lobbyists that try to get more pro-abortion people elected to the state and federal bodies. So that's an important thing to note as well. Any other questions?
Bob?
Yeah.
If someone decides to go the RU 486 route,
Mm-hmm.
do they get a prescription to go to a pharmacy, or how does that work?
Okay, so the question is, if somebody takes the RU 486, the first of the 2 abortion pills, that is administered to them at the clinic. So they typically take that pill before they leave the clinic. Who in here has seen the movie? That's what I was going to mention. Who's seen the movie Unplanned? Okay, so probably 2/3 of you. All right, so you saw that actually happen. So Abby Johnson did that with her abortion, I think her second one. And then you saw the results of that. So she took the first pill, and then she actually took the second pill. And then you saw all the bleeding and the cramping and the agony she was going through. That was a first trimester medical abortion. So then you also saw Abby Johnson witness a first trimester surgical abortion where the doctor was suctioning the baby out after demise, or actually alive at that point. So, because you saw the baby kind of fight and try to stay away from the catheter. So if the woman has taken that first pill, then I think she's supposed to wait 24 hours and take the second pill. All right? You know, that's why we had a doctor explain it the first time, so I'm probably screwing that up. But something like 24 hours to take the second pill. But if you take the abortion reversal pill before you take the second pill, there's a good chance you're going to save your child and give birth to a healthy child.
The pharmacies don't have anything to do with it at all.
No, so the pharmacies on neither end, so the doctor has to prescribe the abortion reversal pill. And that's why the hotlines that are in the pamphlets and the information on Wellspring and stuff is so important. Yeah?
So just, we were having this discussion earlier, so the doctor is administering one in person, but also providing the second for the patient to take home with them.
That's correct.
They don't have to go anywhere to get the
They don't go, the first one is taken in the clinic, the second, at least that's the way it's supposed to be. And I think in most states, the doctor has to actually watch them take the first pill. In Unplanned, they didn't do that. So maybe Texas was different at the time or something. But and then there's also videoing. So some states, I think Iowa just got their law back that said a doctor doesn't have to be actually with the patient. They can just watch them do it on a video. They just hit a button, a drawer opens, they watch them take it, and then they're good to go. And they might have to then go back to the clinic to take the second pill. I don't know. But it's done either in person or in video in a lot of states. But as we saw in Unplanned, she just took it right in front of the front desk person and then took the bag with the other pill in it and went home. Yeah, Connie?
I think just recently in California, they are allowing RU-486 to be distributed at the college campus medical center.
Okay.
And I don't know if the nurse passes it out or if the doctor has a prescription and the nurse passes it out or what.
Okay.
When Sue Thayer came to talk to Hastings here twice now, she explained what the telemed abortion was.
Yep.
What you just described as the video thing. And thank goodness our legislators passed that we cannot do telemed in Nebraska. So the girl would go in the satellite clinic, a doctor would never see her. He would just look at her on the screen and talk via that way. And like you mentioned, if she said, yeah, I still want to do this, he pokes the button and then the drawer opens at her computer desk with the 2 vials of pills.
Yep.
The only instruction was take 1, day 1, take 2, day 2.
Okay.
And whoever was attending, it wasn't even, maybe not even a licensed practicing nurse.
Yep.
Nobody had training.
Yep. So for the people on Facebook, Connie just pointed out that in California, she thinks they've legalized the distribution of RU486 just on college campus clinics. So you don't even have to go to an abortion clinic to get it. And then she talked a little bit more about the telemed abortion, which is the video abortion, where the doctor is even with the patient. So any other questions or thoughts or comments? So there's two movies I would highly recommend. The Abby Johnson's movie Unplanned is a conversion story like Dr. Levatino. And there are a few parts in that are a little bit graphic. If you don't like the sight of blood, Abby bleeds a lot at one point. And then there is a simulated abortion as part of the movie that is really her conversion. But my daughters have all seen it. We all went as a family twice. And I've never heard of anybody really having a trouble seeing it. So our youngest daughter, I think, was 12 when she saw it. Didn't have any trouble with it that I know of. Was it okay? All right. And the other movie is Gosnell. So who in here has seen Gosnell? Yeah, so similar amount, maybe half of you have seen Gosnell. Again, I think another essential movie. Now, Kermit Gosnell was not a Planned Parenthood abortionist. He hung out his own shingle. And so he was just doing it on his own. But his story is fascinating because that was really the first chink in the armor of the American abortion industry, was the realization that there's people out there like Kermit Gosnell doing very, very late-term abortions in filthy conditions, actually committing murder because he was actually having children born alive and then he would stab them in the back of the neck to sever their spinal cord after they were born. Might be a few seconds, but that's strictly prohibited by law. And that's why we have the partial birth abortion ban, so that specific thing can't happen. But people started realizing this stuff actually happens, and even Planned Parenthood was appalled at that, or seemed to be appalled at that for a while. But now if you bring up Kermit Gosnell with the Planned Parenthood provider, they'll just get mad and walk away. But Kermit Gosnell is now in prison for the rest of his life because of the work of a few very courageous people in Philadelphia. So those are two movies that came out probably within the last 3 years. Gosnell was about 2 years ago, and then Unplanned was this year. And I don't think in either one of those there is anything graphic enough to cause anybody serious discomfort. And one thing that we have to do as pro-lifers is we have to be willing to look at stuff like this, because the culture of death doesn't like looking at this. And so I don't know, is anybody in here an abortion advocate? I mean, we aren't going to throw things at you. We aren't going to say anything bad about you. We aren't going to ridicule you. But if you're an abortion advocate, raise your hand. I'd like to see if anybody in here is. Okay, so I was on AM radio. I was on the local, secular TV station. I've been posting stuff on social media. Okay. I've been posting stuff on social media for, a month now. And right before us tonight, the chair of the Nebraska Democratic Party was in this room with about 35 supporters for her book signing. And not one of them stayed for this talk. And they knew this talk was happening because they had to call me and ask me to start a little bit late because they weren't sure if they were going to finish up by 6:30, which was the first time I realized I told you guys the wrong time to be here. But so zero abortion advocates came in tonight in spite of all that because they're afraid of the light. Evil hates the light. So that's a big problem. That's why we need to do more of this, I think. Yeah, Mike.
Just a question about, I think you said that 1/3 of the abortions are Planned Parenthood nationwide.
Yeah.
About the other 2/3, are they taxpayer supported similar to the same rate as?
Oftentimes, yes. So Planned Parenthood. Yeah, so Planned Parenthood gets a significant amount of funding, $616.8 million in 2018 from taxpayer funds, but so do a lot of other abortion providers. So all they have to do is qualify for Title X funding, and they get Medicaid money and things like that, and they can qualify for different programs. So just because they're an abortion provider but not under Planned Parenthood doesn't mean they're not getting federal tax money. They're getting it. And a lot of states also fund it. So a lot of that $616.8 million also came from the state level. So some states, Nebraska hasn't, thank God, but a lot of states will freely support abortion and fund it because they aren't prohibited by federal law against doing that. And so a lot of Planned Parenthood a lot of their funding comes from states like New York, Virginia, California, the most populous states oftentimes. And so do non-Planned Parenthood abortion providers. So an immense amount of money goes to that too. Yes?
I'm Andrea Mack from Grand Island, but my question is if Planned Parenthood is trying to identify a local physician to work either with them or for them, what role are they wanting that person to play? I mean, is the chemical abortion or the medical abortion that you talked about, is that something that a private physician could decide to do? And should they refer people to that doctor if
possibly. So the question is, if you couldn't hear it, is if Planned Parenthood is trying to woo a local doctor to work with them, what are they actually trying to get that doctor to do? Most likely it is to do referrals so that they can refer people to that doctor who will get them to different abortion providers elsewhere in the state, possibly so that they can do the medical abortions, the RU486 for them, but most likely so they would get them to Lincoln and Omaha to the Planned Parenthood clinics, most likely. But they might also work with a clinic that is already doing women's health care and try to get them to do more services like abortions and maybe the medical abortions in the first trimester. So we just don't know that for sure, but we heard some names dropped. We heard some organizations' names dropped, and now we've had Planned Parenthood tell me directly that we hope to be partnering or cooperating with various organizations in the near future, and it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen. So you got to let your doctors know, you got to let the people that run the clinics and hospitals in your community know that we're a no-kill city, we're a no-kill part of the state, right? We've got a no-kill animal clinic here in town, a dog pound here in town that will not kill a dog or a cat. I think we can probably do at least that good with humans, right? So, all right. So we've got 6 minutes before we all have to leave the building, unfortunately. So what do you?
When I was up at Tabor, South Dakota, which is just on the other side of the Nebraska line,
yep,
for the Czech Festival in June, I happened to see the Catholic priest there, the local Catholic priest. So I went over and I asked him. I said, do you do the life chain here in October in South Dakota? He didn't like that question at all. He said, abortion is not an issue in South Dakota whatsoever. I said, oh, really? He says, we don't believe in that life chain because you're a bunch of protesters. I said, we're not out there yelling at anyone. We're not shooting at anyone.
Yep.
We're just holding a sign. It's a
and praying.
vigil.
Yeah.
And he says, it's not a problem here. Well, what I found out is that Sioux Falls has Planned Parenthood, and there's a private abortionist over at Rapid City.
Mm-hmm.
But he told me it wasn't a problem in South Dakota.
Yep. Ignorance is bliss, but it also leads you to hell, I think. But yeah. Probably last question here, so go ahead.
So you don't think Planned Parenthood is trying to set up any clinics in this area then?
I think we should assume that Planned Parenthood is trying to get a very, very strong foothold in central Nebraska to increase abortions, to increase their presence in central Nebraska for some reason. I don't know if we have any evidence that they're trying to open up an actual abortion clinic, but I think it would be foolish to think they aren't. So I would err on the side of caution. You expect the worst, you hope for the best, that type of thing. But I think we always have to stay on top of things just to make sure that people know where we stand, and we don't stand with Planned Parenthood. We stand with human life, and our elected officials have to know that. Our mayors have to know that. Everybody has to know that, especially our doctors and people that run the hospital. Okay, last question.
How do you know if your doctor or your clinic would support that or is being sucked into that?
Okay, so the question is, how would you know if your doctor or the office that they work in or maybe the facility they practice at would support Planned Parenthood or abortion? You ask them. There's nothing wrong with asking your doctor. Now, for one thing I know is that if the doctor prescribes contraception, they are probably not pro-life, because contraception is actually abortifacient. So that is a marker right there that tells you, this is probably not a pro-life doctor. So look for doctors who don't prescribe contraception. And they do exist. They do exist here in central Nebraska. And look for alternatives to that. And if you can't find a doctor that doesn't prescribe contraception, work on your own doctor to get them stopped, or start going to other cities to see your doctor. That's the options that you have. But you got to assume, you got to ask. You can't think, oh, they seem awful nice, because I know some people that are very pro-abortion, and they're very kind people. They just don't understand it because they've never seen the videos. They don't know the facts. They don't know actually what happens, and they misinterpret reality. So, all right. Well, thank you all for coming. It was a great turnout, and let's go out there and make a difference.